Hey guys, so I come to you for a quick Friday reads, or hopefully quick Friday reads. I'm gonna leave in a few minutes right after recording this and posting this. I'm heading out to campus to get to work. My semester is back in full swing. We're in our third week. I have two classes. I'm working as a teaching assistant for one professor, and I'm also still working on several research projects with my advisor. I actually gave my first lecture to a class yesterday for the class I'm TAing for, because the professor was out of town, which was certainly interesting. I enjoyed it. I don't know whether the students liked me, but I liked it. But anyway, I'm here to talk about a few books, and I will try to go through them relatively quickly. So I'm going to do this Friday Reads Mark Nash style and do a quick listing of the books that I've read before talking about them in depth. So first, What to Listen For in Music by Aaron Copland, published in 1939. Love's Labour's Lost by William Shakespeare. Deaf Republic by Ilya Kaminsky, published in 2019. Jersey Rain by Robert Pinsky, published in 2000. And The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton, published in 1905. Almost all 20th century books, except for the Shakespeare, which is impressive on my part. 20th or 21st century, I guess. So to start with, What to Listen For in Music by Aaron Copland. This was published in 1939. Aaron Copland is very famous American 20th century composer. You may know him for his Appalachian Spring piece. He's never been my favorite composer, but this is just his brief little guide to appreciating music. He does some brief discussions of the more technical side of music. He talks about, rhythm, texture, harmony. He talks about some of the forms in classical music, the sonata form, the fugal form, and such. He has a brief chapter on opera, and a very brief discussion of modern music and sort of the challenges of listening to modern music, and especially since modern music is a lot less accessible, immediately accessible than the classical music we all sort of hear about very often, like by Beethoven and Tchaikovsky and others. I was a bit dismissive of this when I talked about this last time, and I feel bad about that because having finished it now, I do think it is a really nice, just a very basic introductory guide to music. His writing style is very easy and eloquent at times. He explains his musical concepts very simply. You can tell that this book is based on a series of lectures that he gave, because lectures, I think, tend to be written in such a way that they have to be easily digestible through one delivery to an audience. And I think you can tell that this was written that way. So I really like that. And there are diagrams throughout this book which I think help a lot, especially when he's talking about the forms of music. Diagrams really help in discussing them, because often musical forms are based on sort of musical pieces being divided into three sections, with one section having a few different sections within that section, and sort of the repetitions and variations that happen between and within those sections. So yeah, I like it. I would recommend it if you are looking for a very basic introduction to music. I can see why it's used as a teaching text often, again, because of just how it's written and how basic it is. So yeah. Next is Love's Labour's Lost by William Shakespeare. I'm going to be posting a video about this tomorrow, and I'm really looking forward to that, so I'm not going to talk about it in depth here. Next, we have Deaf Republic by Ilya Kaminsky. This was just published this year. This is a slim volume of poetry. Ilya Kaminsky is a Russian-born Ukrainian Jewish author who is also immigrated to America, so he's really a Russian-born Ukrainian Jewish American poet. Wrap your head around that series of hyphens. This is a volume of poetry, but it's sort of presented almost as a play. It has a dramatis personae at the beginning. It's divided into two acts. But for me, it was a bit more like a novel in verse, a novel written in a series of loosely connected vignettes, written in verse. And it tells the story of the city of Vasenka. And this city is in an unidentified country, although we can probably assume based on the names that it's probably in Eastern Europe. And this city of Vasenka is experiencing a time of intense political repression. The government is really cracking down on the people of Vasenka, and there are soldiers occupying the city. And at the beginning of this book, a young deaf boy named Petya spits in the face of a soldier, and the soldier shoots him. And in response to that, the citizens of the city go deaf. They refuse to talk to the soldiers. If any of the soldiers try to talk to them, they just point to their ears. And they come up with a series of signs to communicate with, without the soldiers knowing what they're saying. And so this just tells the story of these townspeople, but it specifically focuses on, in Act 1, it focuses on Alfonso, who is a puppeteer, and his relationship with his wife and his newborn daughter. And in the second act, it focuses on Galia, who is the leader of a troupe of puppeteers who starts an insurgency against the occupiers. I found the first act, which focused on Alfonso, much more powerful than the second act. There are a lot of really touching, moving, and erotic poems in that first act. It's kind of about his love for his wife and his daughter, and I think that first act explores just how acts of love and the small moments of joy that still occur in tumultuous times and violent times are sort of in their own way a form of subversion of the boot of oppression, so to speak. I found that incredibly powerful, just looking at that through his love for his wife and daughter. The second act focuses more on this insurgency, and it's a bit more political. It's a bit more sort of social commentary almost. And we're left with this sort of ambiguous idea of whether this going deaf that these people have engaged in is really the best way to respond to oppression, because it does, I feel like, cause some negative things to happen. At one point, the townspeople start to turn on Galia and her insurgency because the soldiers retaliate on the insurgency by bombing stores throughout the town. And so the townspeople turn on this insurgency, and Galia is so frustrated that she tries to yell at the townspeople to get them to understand what she's saying and to understand her anguish. But of course, they can't hear her because they're all deaf. So I wasn't quite sure what to think of what we're supposed to be left thinking about this idea of resistance through deafness. And so for that reason, I'm not entirely sure I can give this a fully positive review, because I don't know whether that ambiguity is something that Ilya Kaminsky was going for, or whether it's ambiguous because he doesn't do his own ideas justice. But I don't know. I don't think this is a book I'll forget anytime soon. I certainly would recommend it if you're just looking for a really interesting, stimulating, and at times very moving volume of contemporary poetry. That is not that hard to read. I read it all in one sitting, so it goes very easily. Next, we have Jersey Rain by Robert Pinsky. Robert Pinsky was the American Poet Laureate from 1997 to 2000. He kind of is a big figure in American letters today. I feel like, I get the sense. He has had a big influence. He did a translation of Dante's Inferno. He's invited for interviews and such and talks. But this was published just at the tail end of his time as the U.S. Poet Laureate, and I only have like 3 or 4 poems left to read in it, and I really love it. I mean, I don't love every single poem. There are definitely poems in here that, as any collection of poetry like this, it's kind of like reading a collection of short stories where it's almost always a hit or miss affair. But one of the poems in here, Ode to Meaning, is one of my favorite poems ever. One of my favorite poems that I've read this year, and I hope to do a sort of poem reading of that at some point. But yeah, Robert Pinsky's poetry is just full of wordplay, literary allusions, literary references, pop references, references to history, and I have a love-hate relationship with poetry like that. When I get the references, I tend to really like it, but when I don't get them, I tend to sort of feel a little bit frustrated. And so that's sort of something I struggle with this collection. But anyway, I on the whole really like this, and I want to read more of Robert Pinsky's poetry. And he's also written some criticism that I think I'm interested in reading. Anyway, that's Jersey Rain. And then finally we have The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. This was published in 1905. It's kind of a modern classic. And it tells the story of Lily Bart, who is this young, gorgeous, brilliant woman who lives among the sort of upper echelons of society in New York City, among the wealthy. But her family is kind of broke, and so she is trying to find the wealthiest husband she possibly can. And so this is the story of her trying to find that husband. And, of course, there's one man named Lawrence Selden who is, perfect for her in so many ways. He's, he's brilliant too. He shares a lot of her sensibilities. He's, well-read and such. He's witty. But of course, he's not that wealthy, so she doesn't see him as a realistic prospect. But then there's a man named Rosedale who is fabulously wealthy, but is absolutely insufferable. So it's just sort of a really brilliant critique of the sort of BS in society and in the way that people are supposed to act in society, and especially in many ways the way women are expected to behave, and this double standard that men and women are held to. I hope to do a whole video on The House of Mirth, so I don't want to talk about too in depth, but something I do think that Edith Wharton does really well. For one thing, the writing is awesome. There are some sentences in this book that have just blown my mind, and I will dog-ear the bottom of a page, I don't know if you can see that, to mark off a piece of writing that I loved, or just a note that I made in a book, and I've been marking off just so many pages just because of the writing, or a sentence I saw in it that I just loved. And another thing that I think she does so well is she switches between third-person perspectives so effortlessly. Most of this book is from Lily Bart's perspective, but she also switches from Lily Bart to some of the other women in her life. Lawrence Selden is a frequent perspective. But I feel like she switches so effortlessly between these different perspectives. And I think that would be so hard to do, because whenever she switches perspectives, it always just feels like a natural part of the sort of omniscient narrator's narrative, I suppose. And again, it's just so well done. So anyway, but I'm hoping to make a whole video about it, so not going too much more in depth. And then finally, I have a 2-book haul. The first book, so I was at the library the other day. The Ilya Kaminsky book is from the library, so I was just there, and I went over to their for free shelf where they give away books that they're retiring or that they received and can't do anything with. I found 2 good finds. So the first is Why I Read, The Serious Pleasure of Books by Wendy Lesser. This was published in 2014, and yeah, it's just an appreciation of reading of obvious interest to someone like myself or any of you who are on BookTube, whether you're a commenter or a video maker. And what I like about the look of this one is she doesn't just talk about fiction, which a lot of these books I think tend to focus on, but she also talks about poetry and essays and just general nonfiction. But she talks about some writers who I like. She talks about D.H. Lawrence. She talks about James Joyce, Elizabeth Bishop, Robert Pinsky. And as always with a book like this, she has a reading list at the back. We book lovers, our TBRs are never ending. So yeah, that was a good find. And it's also a large print book, which I quite like. So yeah. And then the second book is A Literary Life Literary Life with the subtitle A Second Memoir by Larry McMurtry. And this is just his memoir of his writing life. I love memoirs of writers, and this is actually a sort of kind of sequel to his first memoir called Books, which is about his work as a bookseller, and also I think just more generally about his love of reading and books. I feel like I might want to read that book before I read this one, so we'll see if I can find that one. But anyway, I thought this was a good find because I really like Larry McMurtry's. I really like Lonesome Dove. I liked his memoir Roads, so I think I will like this. So anyway, that's my Friday reads. I don't think I went on for too long. Give me your thoughts if you've read any of these books. Let me know what you're reading and how your week's going, and let me know what you're doing this weekend, I guess. And anyway, I will talk to you all in my next video. Bye, guys.